The pilot was unconscious. The co-pilot was down. 287 people were trapped at 38,000 feet with no one to land the plane. Except one passenger. An 18-year-old student. No license. No real training. Never touched actual controls before. But he had something far more powerful: preparation. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The flight nobody will ever forget. The seatbelt sign had just turned off. Flight 447 was cruising at 38,000 feet somewhere over the middle of the country, and most of the 287 passengers on board were doing what people always do on long flights: watching movies, eating snacks, dozing off, or staring blankly out the window at the clouds far below. Nobody was paying attention to seat 22A. Nobody ever paid attention to seat 22A. That was where Aryan Malik was sitting, an 18-year-old college student, thin, quiet, wearing a faded blue hoodie that said State Engineering Academy on the front. He had his worn-out backpack wedged under the seat in front of him. Inside that backpack were 3 aviation manuals, a simulator logbook with over 700 hours recorded in it, a notebook filled with hand-drawn cockpit diagrams, and a tablet loaded with hundreds of hours of flight training videos he had watched so many times he could recite them word for word. The flight attendant had handed him a ginger ale without looking at him. The businessman in the next seat had not said a single word to him. To everyone on Flight 447, Aryan was just a quiet teenage boy heading home after his first semester of college. Nobody knew his name. Nobody cared where he was going. Nobody, not one single person on that entire aircraft, had any idea that in less than 2 hours, his name would be broadcast on every news channel in the country. Aviation experts would be calling his actions impossible, and 287 people would be alive because of him. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let us start from the beginning. Aryan Malik had loved airplanes since he was 4 years old. His father liked to tell the story of how little Aryan used to press his face against the living room window every time he heard an aircraft pass overhead. It did not matter what time of day it was. It did not matter if it was raining or dark outside. The moment he heard that low, powerful hum in the sky, he would run to the window, eyes wide, and watch until the plane disappeared completely into the clouds. By the time he was 10, he had built every model aircraft available at the local toy store. By 12, he had read every aviation book in his school library. By 14, he had discovered online flight simulators, and that was when everything changed. Aryan did not just play with flight simulators the way other kids played video games. He studied them. He treated every session like a real training exercise. He read the actual Boeing operations manuals, hundreds of pages of technical content that most adults would find impossibly dry. He watched real ATC communication videos. He practiced emergency procedures over and over again: engine failures, hydraulic failures, electrical failures, weather emergencies, until he could execute them without even thinking. His bedroom looked nothing like a normal teenager's room. On one wall, he had printed and taped up a full cockpit diagram of a Boeing 737. On his desk sat a proper flight simulator setup, 2 monitors, a yoke control, rudder pedals, and a throttle quadrant he had saved up for 2 years to buy piece by piece. His friends thought it was the strangest hobby they had ever seen. "Why do you spend so much time on this?" his best friend Omar asked him once, watching Aryan carefully practice a crosswind landing at a virtual airport at 11 o'clock on a Friday night. "Because someday I am going to be a real pilot," Aryan said simply, without looking away from the screen. Omar shook his head and went back to his phone. The thing was, Aryan's family did not have the money for real flying lessons. Actual flight training cost thousands of dollars, money his parents simply did not have. His father worked long shifts at a factory. His mother ran a small catering business from their home. Every rupee was carefully counted and accounted for. So Aryan did the only thing he could. He studied everything that was free. He used every simulator he could access. He read every manual available online. He watched thousands of hours of real cockpit footage, ATC recordings, and pilot training videos. When he finally got a scholarship to a state engineering college that had a proper professional-grade flight simulator, he nearly cried with happiness. In his first semester alone, he logged over 700 hours on that simulator. The club advisor, a retired regional airline pilot named Mr. Desai, pulled him aside one afternoon with a serious look on his face. "Arian," Mr. Desai said, "I have been running this club for 11 years. I have never seen a student log 700 hours in a single semester." He paused carefully. "You know that simulator hours are not the same as real flight hours, right? In a real aircraft, everything feels different. Heavier. More alive." "I know," Arian said. "But," Mr. Desai continued, studying him with quiet intensity, "your procedures are cleaner than some regional first officers I have personally flown with. Your emergency handling is instinctive. You have real talent, son." He tapped Arian on the shoulder. "Keep going." Those words stayed with Arian for a long time. He was on flight 447 that day because his college semester had just ended and he was flying home to see his parents for the summer. His mother had packed him food for the journey. His father had stood at the door that morning and said, with a proud but tired smile, "Study hard. Make us proud." Arian had hugged him and promised he would. He had absolutely no idea what was about to happen. The flight had been smooth for the first 2 hours. Arian had spent most of the time reading a manual about advanced autopilot systems, occasionally looking out the window at the landscape far below. He liked watching the geography change, rivers becoming wider, cities turning into farmland, mountains rising and falling on the horizon. He noticed the flight attendants first. It was a small thing, the kind of thing most passengers would never catch. The 3 flight attendants who had been moving through the cabin with their easy, practiced smiles had suddenly clustered together near the front galley. Their voices were low. Their faces were tight. One of them, a woman in her 40s with short dark hair, whose name badge said Senior Flight Attendant, Priya, was speaking rapidly into the interphone with her hand pressed hard against her other ear, as if trying to block out every sound around her. Arian sat up straighter. He had studied enough aviation incidents to know what crew behavior during an emergency looked like. And this quiet, urgent, controlled panic, matched exactly what he had read about. Another attendant was flipping through what looked like an emergency procedures manual. Her hands were shaking visibly. Arian pulled out his earphones completely and sat very still, watching. 30 seconds later, the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon." It was Priya's voice, but it sounded different now, carefully controlled, the way people sound when they are working very hard not to let fear come through. "We are experiencing a medical situation involving our flight captain. If there are any medical professionals on board, doctors, nurses, paramedics, please press your call button immediately. Thank you." The cabin stirred. People looked at each other with worried faces. A few call buttons lit up. 2 passengers, a woman who identified herself as a nurse and a man who said he was a doctor, were quickly led to the front of the aircraft. Arian watched all of this with a cold, growing feeling in his chest. Medical situation involving our flight captain. The captain. The pilot. The person responsible for flying the aircraft. But then a second announcement came, and this time, the news was even worse. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is an urgent update." Priya's voice was barely holding together now. "Our captain has collapsed and is receiving medical attention. Our first officer has also been taken ill and is currently unable to assist with flying duties due to a severe allergic reaction to medication he took earlier. Both crew members are being cared for by medical professionals on board. However, we urgently require anyone with any flight training or pilot experience to please identify themselves to a flight attendant immediately. This is extremely urgent." The cabin exploded. Not loudly, not the way you might imagine. It was more like a wave of shock, a collective sharp intake of breath, and then dozens of conversations starting at once in frightened, disbelieving whispers. A woman near the back started crying quietly. Someone was trying to call family on a phone. A man in a business suit near the front had gone completely pale, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. The captain collapsed, the businessman next to Arian said to nobody in particular, his laptop forgotten on his tray table. The actual pilot. What happens now? Who is flying this thing? Arian did not answer him. He was already reaching up to press his call button. Priya reached him in less than a minute. She looked at him, really looked at him, and he could see her fighting to control her expression. He was 18 years old. He was wearing a hoodie. He probably had a granola bar wrapper sticking out of his pocket. "You have flight experience?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have over 700 hours on professional-grade flight simulators," Arian said, keeping his voice as calm as he could manage. "I have studied commercial aircraft systems for 4 years. I have trained specifically on the Boeing 737, which is what this aircraft is. I know the emergency procedures, the cockpit layout, and the systems." He looked her directly in the eyes. "I am not a licensed pilot. I have never flown a real aircraft. But right now, I think I might be the closest thing you have." Priya stared at him for a long moment. "How old are you?" she asked. 18. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she opened them. "Is there truly no one else? Anyone at all with any flying background? Have you found anyone?" Arian asked quietly. She shook her head slowly. They had checked every single passenger. Not one licensed pilot. Not one military aviator. Not one person with any real flight experience at all was on board Flight 447 that afternoon. Arian stood up. "Then let's go," he said. He could feel every eye in the cabin tracking him as he walked up the aisle toward the front of the plane. The whispers followed him like a wave rolling from row to row. "Is that really who they are sending up there? He is just a kid. A child. We are going to die. He looks like he is still in school." He did not look back. He could not look back. If he turned around and saw all 287 of them, their frightened faces, the children, the elderly couple holding hands, the mother clutching her baby, he knew his legs would stop working completely. He focused on the cockpit door ahead and kept walking. Priya used her emergency override code to open the cockpit door. The first thing Arian noticed was the sound, a soft, steady sequence of alert chimes from the instrument panels, warning tones that nobody had been responding to. The second thing he noticed was the captain. Captain Rajiv Mehta, a man with 14,000 hours of flying experience, a pilot who had been flying this exact route for 6 years, was slumped completely unconscious in the left seat. His head rested at a wrong angle against the side window. His hands had fallen away from the controls. He was breathing, but his face was gray and his body was completely limp. The pilot had collapsed. In the right seat, the first officer sat upright but was clearly in serious distress. His face was swollen, his breathing was labored, and his eyes were glassy and unfocused. A severe allergic reaction to medication had hit him without warning 40 minutes into the flight. He had managed to engage the autopilot and call the cabin crew before losing the ability to function. He was conscious but completely incapable of flying the aircraft, his hands were shaking too badly, his vision was blurred, and he could barely stay upright in his seat. "Can he help me at all?" Arian asked quickly, looking at the first officer. The first officer turned his head slowly toward Arian's voice. His eyes tried to focus. "Autopilot is on," he said, his voice thick and struggling. "Do not touch anything yet. Everything is stable." He coughed painfully. "I tried to call for help. I could not fly. I am sorry." "You did the right thing," Arian said immediately. "You kept the autopilot on. That is exactly right." He looked at Priya. Get him oxygen. And get the doctor from the cabin to look after both of them right now. Priya moved at once. The third thing Aryan had noticed, the thing that had made him exhale with the smallest trace of relief, was that the autopilot was indeed still on. Green lights across the panel. The aircraft was flying itself. Level. Stable. 38,000 feet. Heading steady. He lowered himself carefully into the captain's seat. He had sat in simulator captain seats hundreds of times. But this was different in every way he had not fully expected. The seat was heavier and more real. The cockpit smelled of aviation fuel and something faintly metallic. Through the windscreen, the sky was not a rendered image on a monitor, it was actual, infinite, empty space at 38,000 feet, stretching in every direction with no ground visible anywhere below. His hands hovered near the controls. He did not touch anything. He had learned that in his very first simulation session, never touch what you have not assessed yet. Assess first. Always assess first. His eyes moved across the instrument panel and the systematic scanning pattern that Mr. Desai had drilled into him until it was automatic. Primary flight display, altitude, airspeed, attitude all normal. Navigation display, on course. Engine instruments, both engines running cleanly. Fuel, more than sufficient. Autopilot, fully engaged, maintaining heading and altitude perfectly. The airplane was fine. It was flying perfectly. It only needed someone to land it. Priya returned with a portable oxygen bottle. Aryan put the mask on immediately, breathing carefully, making sure his mind stayed completely clear of whatever fumes might have affected the cockpit. Then, with hands that trembled only slightly, he reached for the radio headset. Mayday, mayday, mayday. His voice came out steadier than he felt inside. This is Flight 447, Boeing 737. The captain has collapsed and is unconscious. The first officer is incapacitated due to medical emergency. I am a passenger with extensive simulator training. I am declaring an emergency and requesting immediate assistance and guidance. The static held for what felt like a very long time. Then a voice, male, professional, tight with controlled urgency, broke through. Flight 447, this is Mumbai Center. We copy your mayday. Can you confirm, the captain is unconscious and the first officer is unable to fly the aircraft? Confirmed, Aryan said clearly. Captain Mehta is unconscious in the left seat. The first officer is conscious but completely unable to fly due to a severe allergic reaction. I have approximately 700 hours of simulator experience on the Boeing 737. The aircraft is currently on autopilot, stable at 38,000 feet. I need guidance for approach and landing. A longer pause this time. Aryan could picture exactly what was happening in that control center right now. Controllers spinning in their chairs to summon supervisors. Emergency protocols being shouted across the room. Phones ringing on multiple desks simultaneously. Senior staff running in from adjacent rooms. Everyone trying to process the completely unprecedented fact that an 18-year-old first-year college student was the only person available to land a fully loaded commercial aircraft with 287 passengers on board. Flight 447, what is your name and what is your training background? My name is Aryan Malik. I am 18 years old. I am a first-year engineering student. I have studied commercial aviation seriously for 4 years and I have over 700 hours on professional Boeing 737 simulators at my college's aviation club. I am familiar with all major aircraft systems, emergency procedures, and approach and landing sequences. A brief pause. Aryan, this is Supervisor Raghavan at Mumbai Center. I want you to hear this clearly, you are not alone. We are activating every emergency resource available to us right now. Boeing's technical support team is being contacted. Senior airline captains are being brought in to assist you by radio. Our best people are coming to help you. Your only job right now is to stay calm, listen carefully, and do exactly what we tell you. Can you do that? Yes, sir, Arian said. Good man. First, confirm the autopilot is engaged and the aircraft is stable. Autopilot is fully engaged. Altitude hold active at 38,000 feet. Heading 270 degrees. Airspeed 460 knots. All major systems showing normal on my displays. Aircraft is completely stable. Perfect. Do not touch the autopilot. Do not touch any flight controls. The aircraft is safe where it is. You have time, and we are going to use every minute of that time to prepare you properly. Understood? Understood, Arian said. He let out a slow, careful breath. Outside the windscreen, the afternoon sky was a deep and perfect blue, the kind of sky he had always loved more than anything. He had dreamed of being up here his entire life. Not quite like this, though. What Arian could not know, sitting alone in that cockpit with the unconscious captain beside him, was the scale of what his mayday call had instantly set in motion. Within 4 minutes, the Director General of Civil Aviation had been woken from sleep and was on the phone. Within 6 minutes, Boeing's 24-hour technical emergency response team had been patched directly into the frequency from their operations center. Within 8 minutes, 2 of the most senior airline captains in the country were rushing to Mumbai Center, one called in from the airport, one pulled away from his dinner at home, to provide real-time guidance to the boy in the cockpit. Within 12 minutes, aviation journalists across the country had picked up the emergency frequency chatter on their radio scanners, and the story was beginning to spread across television channels and social media simultaneously. Emergency services at 3 airports were placed on immediate standby. All air traffic was rerouted away from Flight 447's position and projected flight path, creating a completely clear corridor in the sky. Weather data for every suitable airport within range was pulled and urgently analyzed. And in the cabin behind the locked cockpit door, 287 people sat in various states of fear, prayer, and stunned disbelief, knowing that the pilot had collapsed and that an 18-year-old student was in the seat that was supposed to hold a captain with thousands of flying hours. Priya and her team moved through the cabin with remarkable professionalism. They answered questions calmly and firmly. They directed passengers to keep their seatbelts on. They explained, over and over, that the young man in the cockpit was trained, was receiving expert guidance from the best aviation professionals in the country, and that everything that could possibly be done was being done. One man, a large businessman in row 8, stood up and demanded to speak to someone in charge. There must be someone more qualified than a teenager, he said loudly. This cannot be right. The pilot has collapsed and a schoolboy is flying the plane. Someone needs to take proper control of this situation right now. Sir, Priya said, her voice absolutely quiet and absolutely firm, the young man in that cockpit is the best option we have available to us. He is calm, he is knowledgeable, and he is receiving real-time guidance from some of the most experienced pilots in the country. What I need from you right now is simple: sit down, fasten your seatbelt, and trust him. Something in her voice, the complete steadiness of it, made the man sit down slowly. The elderly woman across the aisle from him reached over and gently patted his arm. Beta, she said softly, even if my time has come, I would rather spend it while someone brave is giving everything they have. Let the boy work. The cabin went quiet after that. 20 minutes into the emergency, a new voice came through Arian's headset. Calm, warm, and powerfully authoritative. Arian, this is Captain Anjali Sharma. I am a line captain with 18,000 hours on Boeing 737 aircraft. I have been flying this exact model for 11 years. I am sitting in Mumbai Center right now, and I am going to be on this radio with you for every single step from this moment until your wheels are on the ground and stopped. Do you understand me? Yes, Captain, Arian said. Good. First I want to hear from you. You told us 700 simulator hours. What kinds of scenarios have you practiced? Arian thought back through 4 years of sessions in the quiet of his college simulator room. Standard approaches and landings at multiple airports. Single engine operations. Full engine failure at altitude. Hydraulic system failures. Electrical failures. Manual reversion flying. Rejected takeoffs. Crosswind landings in different conditions. I have also practiced emergency descents and depressurization scenarios. I have flown approaches into approximately 50 different airports. A brief pause on the radio. That is a serious training background, Arian. Her voice was even and measured, not flattering him, but acknowledging a clear fact. Now here is the most important thing I need you to understand before we do anything else: this aircraft is not in danger right now. The autopilot is flying it perfectly and will continue to do so. We have time. We are going to use every minute of that time to prepare you completely and properly for the approach and landing. Nothing happens until I say it happens. You do not move a single switch or lever without my direct instruction. Clear. Clear, Arian said. Good. Now, we are going to land at Nagpur Airport. It is 180 kilometers ahead on your current heading. The runways there are very long. The weather is perfect right now, completely clear skies, very light winds, almost zero crosswind. I have landed at Nagpur dozens of times. And Arian, she paused, in your simulator training, have you ever practiced approaches into Nagpur? Something small and unlikely shifted in Arian's chest. The thinnest thread of something that was almost, like relief. Yes, he said quietly. I practiced Nagpur twice. I know the runway layout. Of course you do, Captain Sharma said, and there was something in her voice that sounded, somehow, like she was almost smiling. Then let us bring this airplane home. For the next 40 minutes, Arian worked through the most intensely focused experience of his entire young life. Captain Sharma walked him through a complete systems check first, every gauge, every indicator, every warning system, one by one, methodically and completely. The aircraft was healthy. Everything was working exactly as it should. The autopilot was performing flawlessly. Then they began the descent. Arian, set the altitude selector to 12,000 feet and the vertical speed to 1,500 feet per minute downward. The altitude selector is the large knob on the glare shield, the panel just above and in front of the main instrument panel. Turn it to 12,000. Then press the vertical speed button and dial in -1,500. Do it slowly and confirm each step. Arian found the controls exactly where they were supposed to be. He had spent years memorizing this precise panel layout until he could have done it with his eyes closed. He turned the altitude selector to 12,000. He pressed the vertical speed button. He dialed in -1,500 feet per minute. The aircraft's nose dropped gently, barely perceptibly at first, then settling into a smooth, steady descent. The engine tone shifted slightly downward as power reduced automatically. Far behind him, he heard passengers reacting to the change in attitude, a few gasps, a child asking a frightened question. Descending through 37,500, Arian reported. Vertical speed 1,500 down. Airspeed stable at 460. Perfect, Captain Sharma said. Absolutely correct. How does the aircraft feel to you? Stable. Smooth. Responding exactly as I expected. Good. Now we wait for 20,000 feet. Sit back slightly, keep your hands near the controls but not gripping them, and keep your eyes moving across the instruments. Engine readings, fuel state, altitude, airspeed. Report to me every 5 minutes. They descended through layers of thin high-altitude cloud. Far below, the Indian landscape slowly began to resolve itself, the deep greens and browns of the Deccan Plateau, the geometric patterns of roads and farmland, rivers catching the late afternoon light like thin silver threads across the earth. Arian reported every 5 minutes, precise and clean. Captain Sharma confirmed each time, calm and steady, keeping him anchored and focused. At 20,000 feet, she said carefully, now I need to explain something important to you. When you disconnect the autopilot for the final approach, the aircraft is going to feel very different from anything your simulator has ever given you. It will feel heavy. It will feel alive in your hands. Every input you make, even tiny ones, will translate directly into real movement of a very large, very powerful aircraft. The key to everything is small inputs. Gentle. Patient. Do not fight the aircraft. Guide it. Think of it as a conversation, not a battle. Small inputs, Arian repeated quietly. Guide, do not fight. Exactly right. Now, put both hands on the control column. Do not move it at all. Just feel what the autopilot is doing to maintain steady flight. Arian placed both hands on the column. He felt it immediately and completely, the constant, tiny, almost imperceptible adjustments the autopilot was making. Microscopic corrections in pitch. Hair-fine corrections in roll. Maintaining perfect straight and level flight through the invisible, restless turbulence of high-altitude air. The aircraft was alive under his hands in a way no simulator had ever truly communicated. I feel it, he said. His voice was quiet with something close to wonder. Good, Captain Sharma said. Remember that feeling exactly. That is what you are going to be doing when you take manual control. Constant small corrections. Never large ones. Never sudden ones. At 10,000 feet, the approach configuration began in earnest. Nagpur Airport was visible now, a long, defined strip of concrete surrounded by flat land, looking impossibly small and narrow from this altitude. Emergency vehicles were already visible at the runway edges, their lights flashing red and blue in the late afternoon light. Arian could see them clearly and made a deliberate, conscious decision not to think too hard about why they were there. Arian, flaps to position 5. The flap lever is on the center console between the two seats. Move it 2 positions forward. Arian found the lever and moved it deliberately and smoothly to position 5. He felt the aircraft change character immediately. A gentle buffet ran through the entire airframe as the trailing edge flaps extended. The nose rose very slightly, then settled. The airspeed began to decrease steadily. Flaps 5 extended, he reported. Speed reducing through 210 knots. Aircraft responding normally. Excellent. Now at 8,000 feet, flaps to position 15. Then we will do the landing gear. I want to explain that step carefully, because it will feel more dramatic than anything in the simulator. At 8,000 feet, he moved the flap lever to position 15. More buffet. More drag. The aircraft slowed further and felt more solid, settling into its approach configuration the way he had felt it do hundreds of times in simulation, except now it felt 3 times more real in every way. Landing gear, Captain Sharma said clearly. The lever is on the center panel to your left, shaped like a small wheel. When you pull it down, 3 massive landing gear assemblies are going to extend from the belly of the aircraft. You will hear a very loud rumbling sound. You will feel strong vibration through the entire airframe and through your seat. The nose will pitch downward because of the sudden increase in drag. You need to add power immediately, a smooth, small push forward on the throttle levers to compensate. Ready? Ready, Arian said firmly. He pulled the gear lever down. The sound was nothing like any simulator he had ever used. It was a deep, grinding, mechanical roar, a vibration that went through the airframe and through the seat cushion and through his spine and into his hands. The nose dropped and the altimeter unwound faster. Arian pushed the throttle levers smoothly forward. The engines answered with a rising, powerful tone and the nose steadied and held. On the gear panel to his left, 3 green lights illuminated one after another. Gear down, Arian reported, and his voice was slightly breathless but steady. 3 green lights confirmed. Nose attitude stable. Speed 185 knots. Beautiful, Captain Sharma said, and he could hear genuine relief in her voice for the first time. That was perfectly executed, Arian. Exactly right. Now listen to me very carefully, because in approximately 3 minutes you are going to disconnect the autopilot and take full manual control. I need you completely present. Are you with me? I am with you, Arian said. The runway is directly ahead of you. You have perfect clear visibility all the way to the threshold. Almost no crosswind. The runway is 3,200 meters long, you need less than 2,000 meters to stop safely. The conditions are as good as I could possibly give you. Everything is in your favor. She paused. This is a very manageable approach, Arian. I have seen experienced pilots make worse ones. Arian looked out through the windscreen at the runway growing slowly larger on the horizon. He thought about his father standing at the front door that morning, tired eyes, proud smile, saying make us proud. He thought about Mr. Desai saying your procedures are cleaner than some first officers I have flown with. He thought about every night he had sat alone in his room in front of his simulator while his friends were out doing other things. Every early morning he had woken up to study a new procedure. Every hour he had poured into learning something that the whole world around him thought was just a strange, unnecessary hobby. He thought, I have been preparing for exactly this moment for 4 years and I did not even know it. I am ready, he said. Arian, disconnect the autopilot. The disconnect button is on top of the control column, directly under your right thumb. Press it once. He found the button. He pressed it. A soft triple chime sounded through the cockpit. And suddenly, the aircraft was alive in his hands in a way that was completely, utterly unlike anything that had come before this moment. It was like the difference between watching the ocean on a screen and standing in it waist deep. The aircraft moved. Not dramatically, not lurching or pitching violently, but it breathed. It shifted. It responded to every invisible ripple in the air around it, and through the control column, he could feel every single one of those movements transmitting itself directly and honestly into his hands. I have control, he said. His voice came out barely above a whisper. You have control, Captain Sharma confirmed. How does it feel? Heavy. Alive. He paused one moment. Real. That is exactly right. Now, very gentle right correction. The runway is just slightly left of your current nose position. Barely move the column. A touch. Arian applied the gentlest right input he had ever made in his life. The aircraft banked smoothly, almost lazily, and the runway centerline slid across his windscreen to align perfectly with his nose. He stopped the turn and rolled the wings level. The aircraft tracked straight and true toward the runway. Airspeed? Captain Sharma asked. 155 knots. Perfect approach speed. You are precisely on the glide path. Do not touch the throttles unless I tell you. Keep the aircraft exactly where it is. You are doing this, Arian. The runway was growing rapidly now. 1,000 feet above the ground. The details were resolving themselves, touchdown zone markings painted in sharp white, the emergency vehicles lined up in long rows on both sides of the runway, their lights turning steadily. 500 feet, Captain Sharma said. Completely steady. You are flying beautifully. Hold your speed. Hold your track. At 50 feet, I will tell you to flare. A gentle, smooth pull back on the control column to raise the nose slightly and slow the descent rate. The aircraft will settle onto the runway on its own. Do not pull hard. Just smooth and gentle. Smooth and gentle, Arian said. I understand. 300 feet. The ground was very close now. Very real. 200 feet. He could see individual approach lighting fixtures. 100 feet. His hands on the controls were completely still. He was not shaking at all. He had stopped shaking somewhere during the long descent, his mind had settled into the clean, narrow, perfectly focused state that 4 years of deliberate training had slowly and quietly built into him. The state where there was only the aircraft and the numbers and the runway and the voice in his ears and nothing else in the entire world. 50 feet. Arian, flare now. Gentle pull. Now. His hands pulled back on the control column. Smoothly. Gently. The way he had done it 700 times in simulation and the way he had rehearsed in his mind 10,000 times more than that. The nose of the aircraft rose. The rate of descent slowed. The runway surface, just feet below now, stretched out ahead of him, impossibly wide and solid and real after looking so narrow from altitude. And then, with a sound like the most careful and deliberate exhale, like two things finally meeting after a very long journey, the main landing gear touched the runway. One chirp of rubber on concrete. Then the second, a fraction of a second later. Perfectly on the centerline. Arian held the nose up for 2 full seconds, aerodynamic braking, exactly as he had trained, and then let the nose wheel settle smoothly and gently onto the runway surface. His hands moved without any hesitation. Thrust reversers, pulled back and deployed. Speed brakes, lever up. The aircraft shook with the powerful force of reversed engine thrust, decelerating hard and fast. His feet found the brake pedals smoothly, applying firm, progressive, even pressure, not stamping, not jerking, exactly as trained. The runway centerline markings flashed past the nose, slower and slower and slower. And then, 1,600 meters from the touchdown point, Flight 447 came to a complete and full stop on the runway at Nagpur Airport. Arian sat in the captain's seat. He breathed. Through the windscreen, flashing lights of ambulances, fire trucks, and police vehicles surrounded the aircraft from every direction. People were already running toward the plane. On the radio, silence held for 3 full seconds. Then Captain Sharma's voice came through. And for the very first time since this emergency had begun, it was not completely steady. It was thick with something she was clearly working hard to hold back. Arian Malik, she said. That was one of the cleanest, most controlled landings I have witnessed in 22 years of professional flying. A pause. You just saved 287 lives. In the background of the radio transmission, Arian could hear, faintly, the sound of people in the control center cheering. The cabin erupted the moment the aircraft came to a stop. Not in the polite, orderly way of a normal flight reaching its destination. This was something far rawer and more powerful, 287 people releasing terror that had been building for over an hour, transforming it all at once into relief and joy and disbelief and gratitude. People were crying and laughing simultaneously. Complete strangers were embracing each other across the aisle. The mother in row 14 was holding her 2 small children so tightly they could barely breathe, sobbing into their hair and not caring at all. The businessman who had gone so pale at the start of the emergency was pressing both hands flat over his face. The elderly woman who had told the loud man to let the boy work was sitting with her hands folded neatly in her lap and her eyes closed, lips moving in what looked like a quiet and profound prayer of gratitude. When Arian came out of the cockpit, every single person in the cabin rose to their feet. He stood in the doorway for a moment, blinking in the cabin light, thin, young, still wearing his hoodie, looking exactly like what he was, a completely exhausted, overwhelmed 18-year-old who had just done something that should not have been possible. The applause hit him like something physical. Priya immediately put a firm arm around his shoulders because she could see that his legs were not entirely reliable anymore. The adrenaline was leaving his body all at once and the shaking was finally starting. A woman near the front reached out and took his hand in both of hers. An elderly man grasped his forearm and simply said, "Beta. Thank you. Thank you," over and over again, unable to find any other words. A small girl, perhaps 5 years old, held up a drawing she had made on the back of an air sickness bag during the long, frightening descent, a crooked airplane and a smiling stick figure with a big circle for a head. "That is you," her mother explained tearfully. She drew the pilot. She kept saying the pilot will save us. She never stopped believing. Arian looked at the drawing for a long, quiet moment. Then he sat down in the nearest empty seat and put his face in his hands and cried properly for the first time. Outside the aircraft, paramedics boarded within minutes. Captain Mehta, the pilot who had collapsed, was carefully moved out on a stretcher, breathing steadily, his color beginning to return. He had suffered a sudden cardiac event at altitude and would spend 2 weeks in hospital before making a full recovery. He would later say publicly that he would be grateful to Arian Malik for the rest of his life. The first officer, whose severe allergic reaction had stolen his ability to fly the plane, would also fully recover. He too said publicly that the boy had saved every person on board. Outside the airport perimeter, news vans had already arrived. Cameras pointed at the aircraft from every angle. Aviation experts were being interviewed live on television, using words like unprecedented, and extraordinary, and statistically near impossible. Inside the airport, Arian sat in a quiet office with a cup of tea going cold in front of him and made a video call to his parents. His mother answered. The moment she saw his face on the screen, she started crying before he had said a single word. "I am okay, Amma," he said immediately. "I am on the ground. I am safe. Everyone is safe." His father appeared behind her. He looked at Arian for a long, quiet moment, at the tired eyes, the pale face, the hands that were still shaking slightly in his lap. Then he said, very quietly, "I told you, son. Knowledge is never wasted." Arian broke down completely after that. Captain Anjali Sharma arrived at Nagpur airport 2 hours after the landing. She had flown herself there the moment she was able to leave the control center. She was a small woman in her 40s with sharp, calm eyes and the quiet authority that comes from 2 decades of total professional competence. She found Arian in a small office, surrounded by aviation authority officials taking his formal statement. She waited patiently outside until they were completely finished. Then she walked in, sat down across from him, and looked at him carefully for a moment without speaking. "How are you?" she asked. "Tired," he said honestly. "And my hands will not stop shaking." "That is completely normal," she said. "That is your body finally processing what your mind was too focused to feel during the emergency. It will pass within a few hours." She studied him. "Arian, I want to ask you something direct. When you were actually flying, when you had the controls in your hands on final approach, were you afraid?" He thought about it carefully and honestly. "Before it, yes. Very afraid. But in the actual moment of flying, when I had the controls, no. I was just flying." He looked up at her. "Is that strange?" "No," she said. "That is exactly what the best pilots describe. The fear lives in the preparation and the waiting. The act itself, when you are fully present, fully focused, fully committed, the fear transforms into attention. It does not disappear. It becomes fuel." She looked at him steadily. "You have real natural ability, Arian. The kind that cannot be taught or manufactured. It either exists in a person or it does not. And in you, it clearly does." He said nothing. "I want to make you an offer," Captain Sharma continued. "I sit on the selection committee for the National Airlines fully funded cadet pilot program. It is the most competitive flight training program in the country. We select 12 students annually from many thousands of applications. Complete training, full funding, and a commercial pilot license with a Boeing 737 type rating at the end of it." She leaned forward slightly. "I am going to recommend you for direct selection. Not as a favor, as a recognition of demonstrated ability. What you did today was not luck. It was the result of years of serious, disciplined, self-driven preparation. That is precisely what we want in a professional pilot." Arian stared at her. "You do not need to decide right now," she said, standing. "Think carefully. Talk to your parents." She offered her hand. He shook it firmly. But Arian, I have been flying professionally for 22 years. I have worked alongside hundreds of pilots at every level. Today you showed me something I genuinely do not see very often. What did I show you? He asked quietly. Grace, she said simply, under the kind of pressure that breaks most people. That is rarer than any technical skill. That is character. She held his gaze for a moment. Call me. She left the office. Arian sat alone for a long time in the quiet room, looking at the cold cup of tea, thinking about everything. 3 months later, Arian stood at the front of his old school's main assembly hall and tried to manage his nerves. The entire school was present, teachers, students from every year, and parents who had come especially. There was a large banner on the wall. The principal had given an introduction that lasted 6 full minutes and made Arian increasingly uncomfortable with every passing sentence. He looked out at the sea of faces. He spotted Omar in the 3rd row, grinning widely and giving him an enthusiastic thumbs up. He spotted his parents near the back, his mother already holding a tissue, his father sitting perfectly straight with an expression on his face that Arian had to look at for a moment before he could identify it properly, pure, uncomplicated, complete pride. Arian cleared his throat and began. I am not going to pretend I am comfortable standing up here, he said, and the audience laughed a little, which helped considerably. I am honestly more comfortable in a cockpit. Even an emergency one, as it turns out. More laughter. People have been calling me a hero ever since that day. I want to tell you honestly why I think that word is not quite right, and what I think the better, more accurate word actually is. He paused. The better word is prepared. I was not a hero that day. I did not do anything supernatural or magical. I was a person who had spent 4 years learning something he genuinely loved, not because anyone told him to, not because it was going to look impressive on a form, and honestly not even because he ever expected to need it in a real emergency. I studied aviation because I could not imagine not studying it. Because when I sat in front of my simulator, time simply disappeared. Because when I opened an aircraft manual, I forgot to eat dinner. He smiled slightly. My mother was not pleased about that part, as she will probably confirm right now from the back of the hall. Soft, warm laughter. His mother shook her head with a tearful smile. People called my hobby strange. And they were completely right, it was strange. Most people do not spend their Friday evenings practicing emergency descents into virtual airports while their friends are out. Most people do not memorize cockpit layouts for fun. But here is what I want you to understand, and this is the only thing I really want you to take home today. He looked out across the young faces. The things you love enough to study when nobody is watching, those become the things that matter most when everything is on the line. The knowledge you build not for a grade or a certificate or an impression, but simply because you cannot help yourself, that knowledge goes into you differently from any other kind. It becomes part of how you think. Part of how you react under pressure. Part of who you fundamentally are. He was quiet for a moment. The pilot collapsed that day. And for a while it seemed like 287 people had no hope. But 4 years of quiet, unglamorous, completely private preparation meant that when the moment came, there was someone there who was ready. Not perfect. Not fearless. Just ready. He looked down briefly. Find the thing that makes time disappear for you. Study it like it matters, because you genuinely cannot predict when it will. The person you become through that kind of focused, passionate, consistent preparation is someone capable of things you cannot yet imagine. He smiled. I was just a boy who loved airplanes. I still am. I always will be. He paused. I just also happen to have landed a real one now. The assembly hall came to its feet. 6 years later, a Boeing 737 pushed back from the gate at Mumbai's Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj International Airport with 164 passengers on board. In the left seat, the captain's seat, sat a young man of 24 in a crisp white uniform with 4 gold stripes on his epaulets. He ran through his pre-departure checklist with the quiet, confident efficiency of someone who had done this so many hundreds of times that it had become as natural as breathing. He spoke to the first officer beside him in the calm, measured voice of someone who knew exactly what he was doing and exactly where he was. The passengers behind him had no idea who their captain was. They did not know that the young man at the controls was the same 18-year-old student who had made headlines across the country 6 years earlier. They did not know about the afternoon when the pilot had collapsed and he had walked up the aisle of a silent, terrified cabin and into a cockpit he had no right to be in. They did not know about the 4 years of preparation that had made that afternoon survivable, the simulator sessions, the manuals, the cockpit diagrams on his bedroom wall, the Friday nights practicing crosswind landings while the world outside went on without him. They were just passengers on just another flight, trusting their safety to the professional in the front. Which was, Arian had always thought, exactly how it should be. As the aircraft rolled down the runway and lifted cleanly and powerfully into the morning sky, Captain Arian Malik felt, as he always felt at this precise moment, the same thing he had felt the first time those wheels left the ground under his hands. Not triumph. Not pride. Not even relief. Just this, a deep, quiet, unshakable sense of being exactly where he was always meant to be. He had been preparing for this his entire life. He had arrived. The story of the 18-year-old student who landed a passenger jet alone, after the pilot collapsed, became one of those rare stories that people remembered and retold for years. Not only because it was dramatic, though it certainly was. Not only because it was frightening, though it was that too. People remembered it because it carried a truth that felt important and personal, that preparation, done quietly and consistently over years, out of genuine love for something, is never, ever, wasted. Aviation experts who later analyzed the emergency landing said that Arian's performance was technically sound in every measurable way. His approach was stable from beginning to end. His touchdown was smooth and precise. His deceleration was controlled and correct. His radio communication throughout was clear, accurate, and professional. They said that under the circumstances, a more experienced pilot would have been hard-pressed to do it meaningfully better. But what struck those same experts most was not the technical performance. It was the composure. The ability of a teenage boy, sitting alone in a cockpit at 38,000 feet with the captain collapsed beside him and 287 lives depending entirely on him, to stay calm, think with complete clarity, listen carefully, and act with precision. That composure was not natural. It was not something he was born with. It was built, hour by hour, session by session, procedure by procedure, over 4 years of loving something so completely and consistently that he never stopped going deeper into it. His father had said it best, standing at the door on the morning of the flight with tired eyes and a proud smile, knowledge is never wasted. The world found out, that afternoon over central India, exactly and completely how true those words were. And somewhere above the clouds, a young man who had always loved the sky more than anything else discovered that the sky had, in its own way, always been waiting for him.